Right. Sorry, is there a technical issue still?
I'm going to have to turn the sound on because...
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay, I noticed that we have 10 people at this point. Good morning to all of you. It is... Well, actually, I'm making it 10:30 at this point. Leo, can you confirm
What's
that?
happened?
Well, I've got 10:28, so yeah, I think you still have a minute or two.
Still, right, thank you, okay. Okay. Right, we'll give it a couple more minutes.
What is that? Speech. Yeah, no, I need to take off a mute.
Could I just remind?
Could I just go out settings?
Could I remind everybody we're now live, so
thank you very
anything
much.
that's said now.
Thank you,
Leo.
Yeah, it's fine.
Can I just say, panel members attending, can you please keep your cameras on, your video cameras on? Please, you certainly switch off your microphones until you are going to speak and so forth. But in the meantime, can you please put your cameras on? I think it's important that if we are on YouTube, that people can see faces.
Councillor Crosby, it's Hayley Vrico. Unfortunately, my camera's not enabled. There's something technically wrong with it this morning.
It's all right, Hayley. I think the officers by all means can switch off their cameras. I just wanted councillors, member councillors, to keep their cameras on. By all means, put your cameras on when, if they work, when you are speaking. But in the meantime, I would like members to keep their cameras on all of the time. Thank you. Right. I think we're ready to begin. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. I'll now go through, we'll begin with the agenda. There's a number of issues that I have to deal with, though, apparently from a process, but right, where's that thing gone? Right, here we go. Sorry, I'm trying to use two computers at the moment. Right, okay. What I'd like to begin with, please, is can we please take a poll of who is here, a roll call of who is here. Leo, how do you want to do this?
Brent is ready to do a roll call now. So.
Okay, Brent, if you'd like to begin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Crosby?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Butte? Councillor Cato?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cherry?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Solomon? Thank you. Councillor Harley?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Havison? Thank you. Councillor Hearn? Thank you. Councillor James?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Keating?
I am present.
Thank you. Councillor Parker? Thank you. Councillor Willis? Councillor Willis not here?
Councillor Willis is here, present, sir. I'm at school.
Thank you very much.
And I believe, if I may, Chairman, I believe Councillor Parker told me he was giving apologies and Councillor Connolly was substituting. So there is an apology, Councillor Parker. He told me yesterday.
That's correct.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. And then Georgie Bigg.
Present, thank you.
Morning, Georgie.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, Chairman. That's everyone on my list.
Okay, thank you. Just to, as I said earlier on, please be aware, as I'm sure you all are, but I have to provide the reminder that we do have a YouTube link at present, and therefore we are a close examination by the public at this point. would all non-panel members, please, if there are any visiting in, please ensure that both your audio and your video feeds are turned off at all times, unless you're invited to speak. We do have a voting protocol in place, but I think it's very unlikely that we're going to need it. So but if we do, I'll come back to that and brief you on that protocol before we commence a vote. One other thing, I'll do this now, I think. I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome Mike Solomon. Paul, as you know, Paul Gardner has resigned as a councillor, and Mike has stepped in to take his place. And I'm very pleased to welcome him to the panel. I'm sure he will make a helpful, progressive and well heard, I think, contribution to our work. Do you want to say a couple of words, Mike? Is he switching on?
I don't think he acknowledged.
Chairman, he didn't respond to the roll call. I can't see him in the meeting.
Oh, right.
I've just looked at at my email. I've had an email from him to say he doesn't seem to have the link. I've just sent him the link, so he will be with us shortly, I hope.
Okay, well, we'll leave for that. Let's get on. Let's get on. Okay, Leo, please remind me, is there anything else that I need to have highlighted before we turn to the agenda proper?
Just the suggested housekeeping statement. Have you run through the housekeeping statement?
Right, I will do. I think I've covered most of it, but I will go through it in full. Right. The only other bit I note on it is that we are on YouTube. A recorded version of what we say will be available to view on North Somerset Council's website within 48 hours, and that's for the benefit of the people who are viewing us from YouTube. Right, I would like at this point then to move on to the agenda. Right, item 1, public discussion, standing order SSO9 as amended by SO5A, because I've read that because it's in the brackets. Do we have any members of the public or others who wish to speak?
There were none notified, Chairman.
Thank you. So apologies for absence and notification of substitutes. I know that I've just mentioned that Mike Solomon is taking over for the former Councillor Gardner, and Ian Parker did phone me, and I'm sorry, I should have said that earlier, if you haven't been informed, to say that he was being, he wouldn't be attending today. So any other amendment, any other substitutes on that, please?
Just Chairman, to say that Councillor Connolly, he's being substituted by. It has been. I was notified by the group leader that he was being substituted. Brent, can you confirm who the substitute is?
I believe it was Councillor Kieran Connolly, but he doesn't appear to be in the meeting.
Oh, right. A smaller and more intimate group than usual. Thank you. Right, minutes of the 14th of November 2019. Does anyone have any points they want to raise about the minutes?
No, Chairman.
Anyone? No? Okay, then. Someone proposed that we pass them?
I'll propose, Chairman. I wasn't there, but I'm happy to propose.
Thank you very much. I'm glad. Right. And seconder?
I'll second, Chairman. I wasn't there either, but still, it looks okay to me.
I'm sure you read them all in detail.
We have. Absolutely.
Right. Okay, that's passed. Sorry. How do we sign those if they're not signed or anything? Sorry, have I got something completely wrong with that, Leo?
We will have a hard copy to you at the first opportunity, and you will sign it when we get it to you.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. Declaration of disposable pecuniary interest. Is there anyone who needs to announce one?
No, sir.
No, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Right. Matters referred by council, the executive, other committees and panels. Anything?
There were none notified.
Thank you. Right, what I'd like to do, and just bear with me a moment because I need to move to another laptop at this point. The panel's work plan. We would normally have this towards the end. And to some extent we will again, perhaps, because I think it will form part of any subsequent conversation. But what I wanted to do was to just bring that to you before we turn to the officers for their presentations. Just bear with me a minute while I change the file. Right. So what I'd like to begin with is my thanks to everyone who responded to my request for some insight into their skills, their expertise and their experience. And for me, particularly importantly, the ASH they want to work in the future or on in the future. I just loved learning about Sandra's work with her disabled partner, her involvement in Nails with Disability Initiative, and her 2 encounters with cancer. An extraordinary experience. Hugh's claim of being experience poor but energy rich. I thought that was a little belied by his growing skills in policy research, his studies in linguistics, particularly linguistic policy, language and law, and language and identity, and his experiences in Brussels. Caroline's experience as a lawyer working for the British Council overseas, with Greenpeace and with Field, and acquiring a master's degree in law, and provided a very clear, well-informed view of how she views ASH's future purpose and objectives. And Ros has been a volunteer with many charitable organisations since she was 8 years old. You know,
a child.
That's only
10 now.
That's 20 years ago.
Yes, at least 20.
Smooth.
She has so much experience with young carers, with helping people with learning difficulties and domestic abuse issues. I know that I have a great deal to learn from that long experience, particularly with this authority. All of you who responded did seek to highlight some aspects of the ASH that you wish to serve in the future. I think reality bites at this point. None of us expected to be in the position that we are now in. These are extraordinary times. Not only are we trying to manage an ongoing pandemic, which I believe none of us have ever done before. There's a prospect of localized infections peaking in the not too distant future. Very exploratory at this point. An autumn or winter second wave, predicted by many. A significant gap in local authority funding, and a continued lack of a new national model for funding social care for adults and children from government. And on top of that, all the signs of an economic recession. We have never been in this position before. So in my view, the future direction of work for this panel should be COVID-19 guided and focused. Clearly, it will still have to have a scrutiny purpose, but helping to build and deliver policy will also be a key function, I hope, of this panel. At this stage, I'm not going to dictate what the issues are, because I think that is a collective decision. But I do want to bring certain key skills and abilities, bring those key skills and so forth into play, and to highlight some of the tools we can perhaps bring to bear. I know that this panel, or maybe HOSP, has done before. It's done inquiry days, and I think some of you may have been involved in those when they happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Excuse me, Chairman. Sorry, Chairman. I know you're going to probably regret it, but can I just make a comment? And I don't know whether Councillor Willis agrees with me, but I do feel, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we can talk about this work panel. I do feel that once we've gone through this debate, I think we've got a lot of questions that we will be asking, and I think there's got a lot of information that we need to have a feedback before we can make a decision as to how we move forward on that work plan.
You're absolutely correct. See, I didn't disagree. You're absolutely correct. So what I want to do is, and that's the point. So what are those issues going to be that we're going to begin to address? I don't think that is best decided at this meeting, but I do, or my proposal will be that we arrange an informal roundtable discussion with officers in the near future when we can begin to explore these things in order to come away with a clearer picture of exactly what it is that we can help with. And as I say, there are a range of issues and tools that we can use to do that. So it is, to some extent, approaching a bit of a blank form. But nevertheless, I think, as I said, we've never done this before. So I think that we need to approach it in as complete and objective a manner as we can. We do want to help. We do want to work. We do want to do more as a panel. My view is, let's get on with it now. I'd like to open the floor initially to members to say, what's your view? So I've proposed that we reserve this for an informal meeting in the near future, but I would still be interested to know, in order that we can give officers some early insight into the issues and aspirations and so forth that we individually think are important. Speaking personally, mine will be housing. It always will be. So I believe that there is a real focus and need for housing, particularly in terms of affordable housing and housing for people in the most dire circumstances.
Do you want to go round, Chairman?
Yes, please. So, Anne, can I begin with you?
Well, Chairman, yes. Well, I've got many issues and many concerns. And that's why I sort of highlighted the fact that out of this will come something, because I want some answers. I don't expect them today, but I think I need some answers and the way forward. So I think we've got to go through the aftermath of COVID and what's going to happen. The homelessness, quite correct, which is probably going to be an ongoing situation, and also the adult social care. And I think that my questions will be directed to what's happened within the COVID virus and the pandemic. And I think that we need to have those answers, and I think we really need to be able to probably scrutinise them as too big a word, but we need to create something out of it. And as regards, and I think also, Chairman, I think we should probably be liaising with Health and Overview Scrutiny Panel in this, because I think it's linked in some of the things that we're probably going to talk about. And I think that also with homelessness and housing, I totally agree with you, but I also think that housing is such a vast subject, and we have to be very careful, because some of us in our rural areas are trying to fight what is able to be sustainable for us within the infrastructure we've got. So we've got to be very careful how we actually deal with this, because otherwise you could be sorting one problem out where you've got absolutely not a sustainable future in the rural areas, and creating another problem. So we've got to be really careful. It's not all going to be done today or tomorrow.
No. And
thank you, Chairman.
And thank you so much, as usual. Your insight is so helpful. Can I stay with the telephones at this point, and can I go to Ros?
Thank you very much, Chairman. So for me, I quite agree with the COVID issues, as I think we've all said that we need to build on, what we have out there with all those wonderful volunteers and groups that have been helping, and we need to keep the momentum going for them. And part of that, I think, is the scrutiny of looking at how these groups are able to work with the council to help us deliver what we need. But it's also part of having some sort of community development officer again, which we haven't had for a number of years, to be able to lead that through, because we all know volunteers are free, but we do need someone to coordinate it, and that does cost money. It's like a wheel, isn't it? The spoke is the coordinator, and then it feeds out to coordinate everyone. So I think we could do more if we could see a scrutiny of trying to get a development officer. And I think specifically for Ash, one of the real issues that have come up for me dealing with it from residents is obviously a domestic abuse issues. I've been heavily involved with 2 victims throughout the whole of the crisis, supporting them by phone, and some of it has been quite harrowing and very frustrating when I'm shielding at home and I'm trying to deal with stuff by phone and email. The frustration of that when I just want to get in the car and go out and help them is difficult, but we've managed it all together. But the homeless part of that, with the COVID isolation and not being able to get out for them or me, or even officers who are working at home, and the whole point about care at home, that has been another major issue I've been dealing with on a number of cases on my ward. So, it's bad enough getting care at home at the best of times, but when your friend carer or neighbour carer is ill themselves, and then the person who's being cared for has got relatives abroad, they live in America and they can't get here, and then you've got someone isolated, the officers have been doing all their best. We've all been trying to get it, but it is still an issue that is there, and it's exacerbated at this time for people's care at home, obviously because of the issues we've had. But I think perhaps we can look at figures and scrutiny and hours and costs and a range of things on that, Chairman. So thank you.
Thank you, Ros. Thank you very much. Your contribution is to your community is extraordinary. It really is. John Cato. Sorry, Leo. Did you want something? Sorry, Leo.
Just to say that Councillor Cherry has indicated that she wishes to speak as well.
I'm sorry, Deputy Chair. I should have asked you first. I'm sorry, John. Please excuse me a moment. Can we hear from Councillor Cherry first? Oh, I do wish we were back in face-to-face meetings. I really do. Yes. Right, please carry on.
So do we all.
Hi. I really do hope that we can look at how we can develop a work plan, because I think we need to actually focus on specific issues, because as you say, COVID is extremely serious, but I don't think it should guide everything, given that there are several other things that are coming our way, not just COVID. So I think we should also listen to what the officers are going to report on, because as a scrutiny committee, we should be scrutinising the policies that we have. I hope that's just straightforward. Anyway, and not terribly controversial. Thank you.
I think I take your point about COVID in terms of its presence, but bear in mind, based on the list that I read out, it pretty much affects everything to a greater or lesser extent, particularly in terms of social, the social infrastructure of this country. But we shall see. But I hear exactly what you're saying. I agree. I agree with everything that's being said so far. I think it's informed and it's intuitive. John Cato.
I wish I had something much more to add to this, but it seems to me that one of the things that we have been suffering under, I suppose, is increasing need for support within the community in various ways, and I'm not sure how that would all come together. So I welcome a proper full discussion, looking at how we take care of the people we're meant to be taking care of fully. I appreciate Ros and Anne and everybody else that's spoken so far. You've got such a wealth of experience, and I look forward to learning from you.
Thank you, John. Mike Solomon, are you here?
I am here, Chairman. I didn't get my invite until 5 minutes after it started, unfortunately. But thank you, Leo. You came to my rescue there because I had no way of getting in.
Late for the party, Mike.
Well, can I?
It's
one
nice
moment,
to be
please,
here,
Mike. Mike, 1 moment, please. Ladies and fellow members, can I, on behalf of us all, welcome Councillor Solomon to the panel. I'm sure he will make a great contribution. Mike, welcome. It's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I've got an awful lot to live up to now. I'm the new boy, so and as John Cato was saying, I've also got an awful lot to learn. I'm on the HOSP, as you know, so I'm involved with that side of things. Listening to other people speak, I'd like to echo what Ros has said. We've seen a huge community build up during the whole COVID situation, and those groups have been doing fantastic jobs. Some communities have risen better than others to the challenge, but there's still an awful lot of volunteers out there, and it would be a shame if after this crisis has died down, and that will be soon. I pray to God that we keep those communities together. And Ros has got a good point about having a community officer, although we know fully that we're already suffering with budgets, and this particular panel is probably going to be hit possibly the hardest with some of these budget cuts. So we have to be mindful of where that money's coming from. But I totally agree with Ros that it would be something worth putting together to coordinate those people for the future. And I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on the panel, both members and officers, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Georgie.
Just unmute myself. Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping that I'll be able, through Healthwatch, to help with the discussions going forward, because over this period of time, our team, although working from home and all remotely, have been well plugged into communities and to individuals who've been looking for information and advice. And we're just at the moment, we've collected a lot of feedback during this period, and we've separated that from our usual work, and are now returning to each of those individuals for a follow-up. So we're doing a survey currently on if we'd signposted them to services, what was the outcome, where are they now with it. So we should have that information shortly. We've got someone now working on that to be able to develop for us a report. At the same time, Healthwatch England have been doing their wider collection of information, so that might help, obviously not specific to North Somerset, but would give a wider view of what's happening. And there are various COVID reports coming out of Healthwatch England as to what's been happening across the country from a service user and patient point of view. And also we are due to deliver our year-end report by the end of June. So that is, and you'll know that we took on the wider contract from the 1st of October. So it will consist of obviously a whole year's of North Somerset work, but will also incorporate for the latter 6 months the wider area. So that might be of interest to see what the community and individuals and populations priorities are telling us, because I think it's extremely important to see how they feel about what's happening and what the impacts have been for them. And we hope, as I say, to track that through to outcomes.
Thank you, Georgie. That's so helpful. Really is. I think that we will probably turn to you quite a lot to be able to get that particular level of detail and information and flow of thought and so forth. That's going to be really helpful. Thank you very much. Mine's gone slightly blank at this point. Who haven't I spoken to? Who hasn't spoken so far?
Councillor
Sorry,
Keating.
Chairman.
Sorry,
Whatever.
Chairman. Councillor Keating has indicated he'd like to speak.
Right. Thank you. Councillor, please.
Thank you. Apologies that my smiling face doesn't appear on the screen, but my camera's on the blink. I just wanted to make a couple of points on things that I'd appreciate the panel looking at. As Councillor Solomon said, I think budget issues are going to be incredibly pressing, having seen some of the pressure that the budget is under, the likely lack of additional central government funding going forwards. I think there's a real role for this group of councillors to be advocates for the services that we are responsible for, and making sure that we do everything to ensure that social care and housing remains an absolute priority for North Somerset, and that budget cuts do not negatively impact some of the most vulnerable residents who we are responsible for. So I think that should be a core role, scrutinising any decisions in the budget area that might impact on our work, and I think that should be something that maybe is a standing point in the agenda, or we have a session as and when any work is done around the budget. There was also mention of the social housing in rural communities. I think that's something that's definitely worth scrutinising. I've had some correspondence from residents recently who have been offered social or council housing in some of the smaller villages that I represent, and that's great that housing is available for them. But for people coming from Western or from one of the towns, it is a huge cultural shift or disruption to move into a rural community, particularly if they lack transport or a social network, and people are finding themselves isolated, particularly in this current climate. And I think a stream of work that we can look at is how we make sure that we're supporting people in rural communities to access the services and the support that they need. And I think a third stream of work, and again, something that was mentioned, is how we make sure that the work we're doing is aligned with what our residents are wanting us to achieve, and how we consult on some of the activities we bring forward. So I think I would welcome a discussion about how we make sure that what we're doing is aligned with the public's view. It's great we've had this discussion of what we as councillors want to achieve, and hopefully that reflects some of what our residents are asking for. But I think having that broader view of what it is that our communities are looking for us to do feeds into the work plan. And I think I'd leave it there. Those are the 3 points I'd like to make sure we highlight.
Well put, Councillor. Very good. Well done. Who else? Sorry, I really don't have a list in front of me at the moment of who I haven't spoken. Is Karen with us?
Councillor?
She's spoken.
Oh, right.
She has spoken. Councillor
Yes,
James has
sorry,
indicated.
yes. Right. So is Hugh with us?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Hello, Hugh. So please speak.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what's been said on, especially rural housing, because Housing Rural, who are a housing provider, were talking about the huge impact of coronavirus on rural areas and how councils really need to monitor the effect of coronavirus in our more isolated villages, especially the need for key workers to be able to access their communities. Also, a lot's been said about about the effect of coronavirus on our care providers and domiciliary care. I do think that's really important for us to follow, and we probably should. But we are doing that during this meeting, which is good. But we aren't looking into much how the effect on housing, I think. So we know that unemployment is going to has hit North Somerset quite a lot. Is it 30% of our 30% of jobs have been furloughed, and I'm not quite sure about the unemployment rate. What's the effect of that on housing arrears? What's the extent of housing arrears in North Somerset? And also, what's the debt? So how are those who have been affected the most? And what are we doing to support them? Other than that, other than COVID, the leaders spoke about stuff like landlord registration and licensing when we were all first elected in the first meetings. How has that policy gone on since he first mentioned it in our very first meeting and then the second meeting? We already have stuff in our work plan about blue badge policy. Has that been followed up properly? Where's that gone to? And also the technology assisted care working group. Since our meeting to Sycamore Lodge, what are we doing to follow on from that work? How would the officers like us to constructively support them, especially now as a response to coronavirus, we're scaling up the technologicalization projects. So I think that, particularly that point, is something we should probably be doing a lot to monitor at the moment, given the council aims to scale it all up.
Thank you, Hugh. The work plan that we already have has not been entirely abandoned or anything like that. It is still there. There are elements that one of the things that we were planning to do was that we would, with respect to the blue badge program, the next thing we were going to do was to look at the appeal process and so forth. That because we were beginning to get more people who were saying, but I've applied and I can't have it, but I've had them before, and so on and so forth. So that was certainly one of the things that we still have to do, and it shouldn't be discarded from that point of view. We were also looking at whether we could reinforce and make more robust aspects of age and retirement related planning in terms of development and so forth. So we were also looking at, for example, how current planning policies prevent people being able to construct additional accommodation for mums, dads, whoever in their properties. That is still in place. And we've actually made some further progress on that, which I will need to report to you on the next at the forthcoming informal meeting. So these things are not abandoned; they are there, but we are going to have a very different programme, simply based on the pure demands that are being imposed upon us, and they are being imposed in many respects. By simple fact of life is that if, and as I mentioned earlier, my concern is very much from the point of view, what is unemployment going to do to us? Because whilst many businesses have been able to furlough a good many of their employees, what we are beginning to see is that post-furlough decision as to whether they are going to retain those employees. Sorry, Leo, can you advise me who else is waiting to speak?
I don't see any more speakers at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Chairman,
can I just check?
Chairman, could I just come in one moment?
One moment. Before we end this, Anne, do you have anything else to say?
Well, I've got quite a lot to say, Chairman, but quite frankly, I feel that some of the things that we've been discussing, however important they are not are indirectly related to what we're trying to do. And I think, you know, there's lots of issues that we've got to look at following the COVID, following the hospital discharge, following the PPE and all of that. And I think that's going to take up an awful lot of time.
I agree, and that's why I've said that we will have a separate informal meeting in order to begin that process. Ros?
Yes, thank you. First, Chairman, just before, if there was a lot of noise from my end on the phone, it's because someone's decided to dig up the road outside of my house, and I had to shut the windows whilst on the phone. If I disappear, it's because I've died of the heat now, because I've got no air. So if you don't hear from me again, I'm dead. So send flowers, won't you?
Okay.
Thank you. And for all of this work with the COVID that we've all been talking about, maybe, you know, when we have some sort of normality of workplace, you know, where people are back to normality of work within buildings and whatever is needed, and things have calmed down, maybe that is something that could be the inquiry day for, rather than doing little pieces, so you can get all your partners there to do it in one avenue on sort of a 6 or 7 hour day, and do it all in one bash at it. It may be easier than trying to pick at it in little sessions for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I just underline again, members, that my anticipation, and I hope all our anticipation, is that there will be task and finish groups, there will be standing groups, there will be one thing I'm very keen on, and I've discussed this with Ros recently, is the opportunity for someone to, in effect, scout for issues between panels. There are opportunities, I am sure, for us to work on specific issues, joint issues with HOS and others. So we will be looking for those opportunities, and we need people to scout for those things as well. At this point, what I'd like to do is to move on to, oh, sorry, no, there was something else. What I'm very keen, and I appreciate that we're about to get a presentation from members, some of the members, sorry, some of the officers. What I'm keen to know, officers, is whether there are specific issues that are coming to mind for you that that this panel can be particularly helpful on. Hayley, would you like to begin to comment on that?
I think, Chairman, the issue that's been raised, which is quite valid, is about the ongoing funding for adult social care. Because as we spoke earlier on, I am very concerned that as people begin to lose their jobs, that will impact on their housing status, it will impact on their mental health. And we also know that a number of younger people who have contracted COVID have been left with illnesses that we haven't seen before. And I've had personal experience of that. And so I think we will see younger people needing adult social care support and not just the traditional over 65s.
Thank you, Hayley. Thank you. Gerald.
Yes, I think I echo Hayley's comments. Clearly, not only is it the financial pressures, but yes, the challenge of balancing demand with supply, and obviously the huge impact that our care providers have had during this crisis in terms of supporting the NHS, and they have been at the bottom of the pile and have had, you know, quite a lot of challenges in terms of sort of support to the NHS, and clearly in a very difficult financial environment, we need to do what we can to support those markets, especially if hopefully in the years to come we move beyond COVID, and we need the legacy of those services to be in place to meet our demographic challenges.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think probably two areas for us, which I think all of the panel members have referenced in one way or another. And overall, it's really about, I think, us supporting you in your role in terms of being able to respond to any queries you may receive about either our homelessness service or those services which work in the community, where we're going to have to work with a new normal. So going into people's homes to visit them and check their standards will require completely different ways of working, certainly initially, than we've been used to in the past, which for any service of that nature will make things more time consuming, for example. So I think helping you to be able to respond to any queries that you receive, and also give you the opportunity to challenge how we are approaching things in those two areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheila, good morning.
Good. Oh, sorry. Oops, Daisy. Good morning. Sorry, my mute button was on. So I probably wouldn't have anything additional to add to what my colleagues have said. Apart from probably that, notwithstanding the COVID priorities, I think that the panel mustn't lose sight of that, the bigger piece in regard to adult social care and long-term sustainability, and in doing that, take the lessons learned from COVID. And I'm keen is that people hear from Hayley and Gerald and obviously Mark from Homelessness today, because I think that some of the presentations may then help to shape up how we bring together the learning from the COVID with the longer term sort of scrutiny that you will need to do of our work, but also as a lobbying group, frankly, at a national level around needing to sort that sustainability going forward.
Thank you, Sheila. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. On that note, can we begin and hand over to Hayley for her presentation on COVID-19 and the hospital discharges?
Excuse me, Chairman, may I just say it says I have attached papers.
Exactly.
But I haven't got
papers.
any.
No.
There are no papers attached, so I haven't been able to read anything.
No.
So if there's a presentation, I won't be able to see it because I haven't got it.
Neither can I.
Leah, can you help us on that?
Through you. Can you not see the papers on your iPads?
No, it says attached, but there's nothing there, Leo.
No attachment.
If you go on the council website, under the meetings, they are available to the public, so you can follow on that way if that's easier.
I wouldn't be able to get on it because I can't get on the iPad properly this morning anyway, Hugh. So thank you, but thank you for that suggestion. But okay, I'll just have to listen. Yeah.
Oh.
Perhaps. Dear.
Right. If we let's Hayley, over to you at this point. In terms of, sorry, before we forget that. That threw me slightly. Of course, you can't see anything, can you?
No.
Right.
No.
I don't. To be honest, I don't see how we can resolve this unless someone has an alternative suggestion.
How big is the document, Chairman?
Sorry, Chairman. It's Sheila here. Can I just suggest, because Hayley will be using the slides. So I anticipate Hayley using the detail from the slides in her in talking. So yes. I think if Councillors Willis and Harley can't access this on their iPads through the North Somerset Council website or the attachments, then I think that actually that Hayley will ensure that they hear from her what's on her slides. So is that okay, rather than getting a bit
perhaps
thrown?
We could have them emailed afterwards.
Can we? Yes, exactly. Can we have them emailed afterwards?
I will certainly email them to you.
Fine, yes. Thank you.
We will ensure that you receive them.
Thank you.
On that note, Hayley, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. In a meeting with the chairman, we agreed that whilst it would be really useful to talk about hospital discharges this morning, I thought it was also really important to talk about what we're doing to prevent hospital admission. As we know, hospitals have had significant problems with COVID, Western particularly, and so a lot of our work has been focused on trying to keep people out of hospital, which I think is equally important. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Leo. So at the beginning of COVID, the Department for Health and Social Care issued specific guidance for local authorities. The first being around adult social care and the need to have a 7-day service, specifically to support hospital discharges, because it was made very clear to us that discharges for all patients should happen as soon as they were clinically safe to do so. Alongside that, they also gave us the ethical framework for adult social care, and the principal social worker for adult social care worked with me looking at the ethical framework, because it really led us and advised us that whatever we did in terms of our response to COVID, it had to be ethical. Any changes that we made to the way in which we were working shouldn't fundamentally impact on the outcomes for adults. And so it really led us to think about how we worked more agile as a workforce, how we responded to immediate need, and how we ensured as much as we could that people were safeguarded in the community. So if we can go to the next slide, Leo.
Sorry, Hayley, sorry if I
alongside
Hayley, sorry if I interrupt a second.
Yes.
I feel we need to do this. Anne and Ros, do you need any further clarification on what Hayley's just said, because you don't have the benefit of the screen?
Well, from my point of view, Chairman, some of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the things that Hayley is probably saying will be in the have we got a COVID thing further on in the agenda?
Right.
So, I mean, some of the things that certainly I would be bringing up and asking questions on may be in that, but obviously I would say that once I receive the presentation, I might have some questions,
Fine. Okay.
which I'll go direct to Hayley.
So
Same for me.
Thank
Yeah,
you. You've taken the words out of my mouth. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry about that, Hayley. I just felt the need to check. Please carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. So the other piece of guidance that we were given from the Department of Health and Social Care was what they referred to as Care Act easements. And what this means is that we are dictated by the way in which we work by the Care Act 2014. However, the Coronavirus Act 2020 allowed local authorities flexibility in how it applied its statutory duties under the Care Act. And the easements were broken down into 4 stages. So stage 1, we remained as business as usual. Stage 2, we could apply flexibilities whilst continuing to meet our legal duties. And stage 3 was streamlining services under the Care Act easements, and stage 4, prioritisation under Care Act easements. Now, very few councils in the country actually went to the highest level of alert, which is stage 4. North Somerset Council throughout COVID have been at stage 2. That means that we've been applying flexibilities. Probably the most noticeable has been daycare centres, which we felt that we needed to close initially because the majority of people who go to daycare were medically vulnerable and in the shielded group, and we couldn't ensure that people wouldn't contract COVID. And so we made the decision that we would close this and put in a different offer, which I'll leave about that present. So we're operating a stage, and I review this weekly with the principal social worker, and that is published on the North Somerset website. So it is there to see at which stage we're always operating.
Right.
Is there any questions
Hayley,
on that?
Yes, can I interject a second? Your microphone is breaking up a bit. Is that is there anyone from tech who can sort that out? No?
Hear me now?
Yes, let's just treat it as a blip at this point. But if it continues, carries on, we'll need to deal with it. Thank you. Please carry on, Hayley.
Okay. If you can't hear me, Chairman, at any point, just raise your hand. Okay, the next slide, please, Leo. So during COVID, as you all know, the government did release additional monies for the local authority and for the clinical commissioning groups. They also ask us to stand up what they called a silver command structure. So they are meetings that both Gerald and I engage with, sometimes daily throughout COVID, with our CCG partners and Serona, our community health provider. They also ask us to fully implement what they call discharge to assess, which I will come on to in more detail as I go through the presentation. But they also ask us to suspend Care Act assessments and continuing healthcare assessments in the hospital setting to ensure that we could speed up discharge. And they created a £1.3 billion new national NHS fund. All of those were published in April in new guidance, in which it was explained how we access some of that CCG funding. So next slide, Leo.
Chairman, could I just ask a question on that CHC
So
funding?
at the moment,
yes, Hayley,
the transitional...
Hayley, sorry. I think
Yes.
Councillor Willis has asked a question.
Yeah, the CHC funding suspended throughout the COVID for the hospital discharge. Does that mean that it was being paid under the grant funding that was coming down, or does it just mean it's suspended and you find it, you have to go for it afterwards? That was my clarity. Thank you.
Okay. For all hospital discharges at the moment, anybody leaving hospital, their care is being funded through the national grant. However, for anybody who we feel is meeting the criteria for continuing healthcare, we've still been doing the checklist, and we've got a spreadsheet with all of those people on it. And the continuing healthcare assessments are going to begin again on the 1st of July. So anybody who may be eligible for CCG funding under continuing healthcare, it will be backdated.
Lovely, thank
Does
you.
that answer
Thank
the
you.
question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at the moment, the transitional period for hospital discharge and its funding, we don't know how long that will go on for. I'm part of the Southwest Association of Directors for Adult Social Care, and we are having those conversations there, and they are now happening at a national level. So I'm really not going to go on too much about the funding, because I know Catherine has got a presentation a bit later on and will probably explain it much more eloquently than me. So if we can go on to the next slide, Leo.
Bear with me a minute, Hayley. I'm just having a minor technical problem.
Hayley, just for clarification, I wouldn't normally interject into your presentation, because you will normally call for questions when you're ready for them. I was simply doing that in order to assist Councillor Willis and Councillor Harley on their telephones. It was just so I'm not inviting everyone to pop a question in when they want.
Chairman,
for other members, sorry, one moment, please, Anne. Let me finish.
Sorry.
Can I just say to other members, can we wait until Hayley calls for questions? As I say, I was only interjecting on to assist Councillor Willis and Councillor Harley.
Yes, just absolutely agreeing with what you said, Chairman. I mean, Councillor Willis wanted clarification, which is absolutely correct. I will be saving my questions when Hayley calls for them after her presentation.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you. Thank you, Ross. Right, ready when you are, Hayley.
Okay, Chairman, thank you. So as I've said, as of the week of the 19th of March, the new funding criteria for hospital discharges began, and Gerald's team in Brokerage have done a fantastic job of working with the CCG, who commissioned around 50 additional beds for people to move into when they left hospital. We always maintained the home first principle, so where people could go home, they've absolutely gone home. But what we did find was for a number of people who had had COVID, they were really quite debilitated and did need a period of residential care before they went home. So we've also been able to fund some admission avoidance. So where particularly we might have had 2 older people living at home, we've had instances of one person having dementia and a possibility of their partner having to go into hospital, but we've been able to work with a community health provider and we've placed some people in residential care with support from the community health provider, simply to avoid a hospital admission and the likelihood of somebody catching COVID while they were in a hospital setting. But that always comes via myself or Gerald, because we have to account for that with both Catherine from a finance point of view, but also with the clinical commissioning group. So is there any questions on that?
Is this your report, what you've just done, is it,
No,
Hayley?
if we can move on, Leo. Yes. So moving on to the next slide, I want to talk about the work that we've been doing in adult social care to avoid hospital admission. As I said, we stood up a 7-day service for adult social care, and that included Gerald's team for Brokerage, because whilst we can assess people for social care needs at the weekend, we need the Brokerage team who are actually in daily conversation with our care providers to ensure that where we needed to set up a package of care or temporarily place somebody into a residential or nursing home, we could do. We are still maintaining a 7-day service at the moment. We're also undertaking same-day triage in our single point of access. So anybody who has contacted adult social care throughout this period, we have triaged so that we're identifying immediate and urgent need as well as safeguarding concerns, and they have been prioritised and sent to the teams for an assessment on the same day. We've also been working very hard with carers assessments, an ongoing referral to other agencies, and we have seen throughout this period numbers of carers who have simply become unable to cope. And we're not surprised by that, because people haven't been able to access daycare, they haven't been able to get any respite, and for some carers, they're actually brand new to caring, they've never had to do it before. And so we've really put a lot of effort into maintaining carer support wherever we can. We've also been undertaking same-day telephone assessments with people, and we've also been doing that via Skype and using different apps so that we can actually see people when we're talking to them. And you might be surprised to find that many older people have become very tech savvy throughout COVID. And so we have been able to do remote assessments very successfully. We've also, one of the new things that we've been doing is a virtual hospital round conference call. And that is a telephone call that involves adult social care, GP practices, Serona Healthcare, and in some cases, Western General. So that the people who we've been really concerned about, and there's been potential for a hospital admission, we've actually discussed these people in a virtually multidisciplinary team meeting and all put together a plan to avoid hospital admission. We've also been using Serona Healthcare, who have got a rapid response service. So for anybody who has had immediate needs, Serona have stepped up and prioritised those cases. And we've also been working with what is called GEMS, which is a geriatric emergency medical service based at Western General Hospital, where again, if anybody did go to A&E, we were assessing them in the GEMS service to see if there was anything by way of a service, a change in medication, or a piece of occupational therapy equipment that we could provide to turn that person back and get them back home as quickly as we could. And we've also been working with Gerald's service on the wellbeing service, which is a telephone-based service which can contact people a number of times a week to check on their well-being. It's also linked to assistive technology and telecare. And again, I know Gerald's got a slide on that, so I won't steal his thunder. But we've also made significant efforts to work with the voluntary and community sector. I think it's a testament to our community that the voluntary sector has really stepped up throughout COVID, and they've really supported adult social care, especially in befriending people, undertaking people shopping, collecting prescriptions. They've been an absolute godsend to adult social care, and going forward, I think that the group might want to think about the work that we do to ensure that the voluntary sector receives the support from the council that it needs, so that going forward we don't lose that effort. Next slide, please, Leo. So the wellbeing service, as I've just referred to, has met a significant need in adult social care, especially for people who have been lonely and very isolated, which, as you can imagine, for some of the clinically shielded group, some people haven't been out for 3 months. And just to hear somebody on the end of the phone asking about your well-being and whether you've got the essentials at home that you need, that has been such significant support for people. And we've also linked this to what they call the Integrated Control Centre. So for anybody who has left hospital and have had community rehabilitation, if they've needed ongoing support, the wellness service has stepped in there to really provide that ongoing befriending and trying to prevent that very isolated feeling that a number of our older people have felt. So next slide, please, Leo. So I just wanted to give you a flavour of how we used to work on hospital discharge so that you can see the distance that we've travelled. So prior to COVID, we had a very complicated process where for anybody leaving hospital, there was a single referral form that was completed and then it was sent to an integrated care bureau. Sometimes the single referral form would go backwards and forwards for several days, and that would delay somebody's discharge from hospital. Some cases that received a single referral form were then further triaged and sent to our assessment and reablement team, which again could cause a delay. And then a social worker would attend the hospital to undertake a face-to-face assessment to try and gather what was actually needed on discharge. The assessment then was written up along with a support plan, and the funding was agreed, and then it would be sent to the brokerage service. So as you can imagine, all of this could take anywhere from 3 to 5 days, which meant that that person was sitting in a hospital bed whilst in the background we completed all of these processes. And it also meant that we were attending several calls a week, not only with Western General Hospital, but also the 2 acute trusts in Bristol, and sometimes at Musgrove as well, which, as you can imagine, took up an awful lot of officer time. So if we can move on to the next slide, Leo. So when COVID came along, we had to fundamentally look at the way in which we discharge people from hospital to ensure that wherever possible that happened on the day of the referral. So we worked very closely with Serona Healthcare and we agreed that all of the single referral forms would be completed electronically and they would be sent to Sirona. We now have a daily telephone call with the Integrated Care Bureau so that we can agree that people are leaving hospital and going to the right place, whether that be temporarily into a residential or nursing home, whether it's going home with support, whether they can go home independently, or whether they need support from Sirona ongoing in their own home. So once that's agreed, and as I said, that's mostly on the same day, if somebody needs support, that single referral form is sent to brokerage and they will spot purchase, whether that's domiciliary care, residential or nursing home. And then Sirona Healthcare will support that person if they're going home and hand over to adult social care if there's ongoing needs. So this has actually reduced somebody's discharge from hospital potentially for up to 5 days, which I think is a significant achievement in a very short period of time. So moving on, Leo. So the benefits that we've seen for people leaving hospital, I absolutely take on point George's point from Care Watch around understanding the outcomes for people, especially for those who have left hospital. And we're now doing a piece of work with Gerald's team so that we can monitor that and track exactly what has happened to people on their discharge to ensure that we've appropriately met their needs. If you can move on, Leo, it's gone back a slide. Next one. Okay, thank you. So it has provided a more seamless service for people leaving hospital. The discharge process has been sped up significantly. We have had access to health funding, though we don't know how long that will continue for. There has been a reduced risk in the reduction of physical activity because when people are sat in a hospital bed, they very much lose their function. And so the quicker that we've been able to get them back home, we've limited that. We've increased the use of assistive technology and telecare to support independence, and Gerald will talk about that further. The referrals to the wellbeing service we've discussed. Increased support to carers, and I know, having spoken to Gerald, that a number of the daycare providers, if they haven't been open, they have been contacting people and providing remote support to carers wherever possible. We've made significant referrals onwards to the community and voluntary sector, and we've increased domiciliary care capacity, and Gerald again will talk about that, but I think we've been a bit of an outlier in the fact that we've attracted more people to the care industry throughout COVID, which I know Gerald will be doing a lot of work on going forward to see how we maintain that. So next slide, please, Leo. So for me, I'm starting to think about restoring services and also looking at what we've learnt throughout COVID to see what we can take forward. We need to be mindful that our acute trusts are going to lose about 1,000 beds in the southwest. The loss of beds in the BNSSG, so South Gloucestershire, Bristol and North Somerset, is going to be around 300, and 42 of those will be at Western General. And bearing in mind that Western General is one of the smallest hospitals in the country, it only has 260 beds. So proportionately, that is quite a number of beds. And as the chairman pointed out, there is a risk of a second wave of COVID later on in the year. And we're also trying, believe it or not, I know it's very sunny, but I'm already thinking about winter pressures, because if we get flu and a second spate of COVID, the loss of 42 beds locally is going to be quite significant. The reason for those loss of beds is because the hospitals have been told to zone patients. So put simply, a green ward will be a ward where we know people haven't got COVID. Amber is where people are being tested because they're potentially contaminated. And red will be for people who are COVID positive. They also have to observe social distancing, and they've also started to see an increase in admissions due to cancelled procedures. And that point, I think, is really important because aside of the deaths that we've seen from COVID, we also know that there's been excess deaths, and that potentially is for people who haven't accessed treatment or their treatment has been ceased throughout COVID. And potentially that is going to be a very significant number of people. I think the concerns on that are around people who might have experienced a minor stroke or heart attack and didn't go to A&E. And if their condition continues, they are likely to have a significant health episode which will need adult social care support. And I think it's something that this group needs to think about alongside preparing for winter pressures. And for me, I think that's one area of support I would welcome from this group about how we prepare for that. Next slide, Leo. So, as I said, we're starting to think about how we restart services. Residential reablement. Residential reablement, a lot of our care providers, the residential nursing homes, have been very reluctant for our reablement officers to go into their care homes because of the risk of transmission. We are steadily restoring that service, but we need to fully restore it because we need to try and reable people so that they don't languish in care homes and that we can actually get them back home where they want to be. Likewise, we're also working with our domiciliary care providers to ensure that they are working to reable people as well to reduce their needs. And also, we're talking with Serona Healthcare about their health rehabilitation offer and how we can link with that. Continuing healthcare assessments are beginning again on the 1st of July, and we're fully engaged in that conversation. And as I said earlier, that will be backdated for anybody who is eligible for continuing healthcare. And I'm also looking at the model for an integrated discharge service. I hope you agree with me that the process that we've put in place has meant that people can leave hospital almost immediately when they're medically fit. And I want to see how we can harness the good work in that area going forward. And we're also talking to the clinical commissioning group about discharging people and for how long the offer from the CCG will be in terms of funding and the additional beds that they've purchased in the North Somerset area. So next slide, please, Leo. So I'm happy to take any questions. Another few things I think that I would like to mention, Chairman, before questions. Yes. We are also looking now at how we restore face-to-face assessments with people. We can do it safely. There is good PPE guidance. I am concerned about the number of domestic violence cases that are beginning to increase. We're seeing people with mental health problems now, some people who have managed their mental health very well, but especially for those who have been isolated, those who are fearing losing their jobs, we're already beginning to see an increase in that area. We're also seeing an increase in carer breakdown. And so I think it's really important that we get out to people's homes to really assess them. So I've got a meeting with my service managers next week to look at how we do that. We also need to be mindful that the shielded programme is coming to an end on the 1st of August, and that will mean that some shielded groups will be able to go back to work and people will be able to leave their homes. but it also means that the food parcel delivery will cease, as will medical supplies. So that will be another additional pressure on adult social care that we need to meet. And I'm also mindful, and Georgie, you've probably heard of this, but we're seeing that for some people who may be able to go back to work, they won't want to volunteer as well. And so it's about the support that we give to the remaining volunteers to really support our community and meet some of the increase in demand that we're going to see. But I also do want to learn from some of our experience of remote working, because one thing that it's taught us is that we do not have to assess every single person face to face. We can do it much quicker remotely to do an initial assessment and to triage people so that we can really focus our efforts on those people who desperately need adult social care support. We're also talking with Mark in housing about restoring disabled facility grant assessments, and we're also planning to open the Medtech Centre in the next few weeks so that the assistive technology care and occupational therapy offer can support people. So there's some of the things that we're doing, but I think I would just like to say that I think adult social care has responded fantastically throughout this crisis. I'm not going to say that we've got everything right, but our staff group have been very flexible, they've been very adaptable, and I know in Gerald's area we have had fantastic support in terms of 7-day working. And I would just like to pay thanks actually to adult social care staff, because they've shown a lot of dedication and support. And actually the number of compliments that we've had in COVID has actually gone up, which I think is it speaks for itself. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Compelling. So informative, so compelling. I have to admit, on a personal level, all of my contact with your department and adult social care has been absolutely brilliant. Given the pressures upon you, it's been extraordinary. And I would seriously echo your appreciation of your teams and so forth. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Right, before we progress any further, can I just say, and I should have said it earlier on, if you wish to speak, ask questions, can you please indicate via chat that you want to, so that Leo can do them progressively. But before we go to that, can I ask if the Anne or Ros wish to ask a question first?
Yes, Chairman, I do. And I do, Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Okay. If we begin with you first, Anne, and then you, Ros, and then Leo, if you can indicate who will be after Ros. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Chairman, the next speaker after the two telephone speakers is Councillor Solomon, Mike Solomon.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead.
First of all, First of all, Chairman, can I just say, yes, thank you, Hayley, for that presentation, and I look forward to reading it in depth when we get it. And I would concur with you that, and thanks to all the hard work that you've done, and I know how difficult it has been. I suppose, and you may correct me on this, that we have been a bit fortunate in the southwest that the coronavirus has not been as bad as it's been elsewhere, but that's not to say it's been easy. And I've got a few concerns. Maybe it's not within your presentation, but it's difficult to know where it would come. I would say, and from personal experience, I do have some concerns about the discharge. I really do have concerns about it, and not so much from Western Hospital, I have to say, but I suspect it's national. But when the thing is, when people have gone into hospital and they don't know whether they've got COVID or what they've got, and quite frankly, if I'd had a heart attack or anything like that, I would actually be ringing up 111 or whatever, because that is vital, and I've had to do it during this COVID virus. I think then you're put through another system. And my concern is that whether that system would stand up, and the discharge I am concerned about is trying to get them back out into a home is very difficult, because actually you might be doing it, but I'm not saying it's done from Bristol, where I've been dealing, but coming into this community, they don't actually talk to the carers. They're just discharged, and that's it. And sorry,
do let me interrupt a minute. We've got a fair number of people to get through, and not a lot of time. What is your question? Would you
well,
be
can I, if you don't, quite frankly, I'm asking the question. You have to give a bit of a feedback, so that you can, so that you know what question you're asking, Chairman. Yeah. If not, I won't ask a question. That's simple as that.
As I said.
So basically, what I'm asking is this. I want to know if we've got statistics of how many people have actually died of COVID or other related diseases, which is linked to COVID. So have we got any statistics on that? I'm a bit concerned about the transmission. And I welcome the integrated medically fit to restore face-to-face assessments. But I am still extremely concerned about the discharge and also into our homes. If we could have some figures on how many homes have been affected by COVID. And also what concerns me is the beds loss. What is happening to the Nightingale Hospital in Bristol? Surely we can use that, can't we? Or is that going to be dismantled? I mean, and quite frankly, Chairman, and the other question I'm going to ask, and it's all been disjointed through your interruption, the other question I'm going to ask is this, that we have norovirus every single year, and it gets worse, and we have flu. So have we got these situations in place now that we can actually deal with it? But I will leave it and then email, because quite frankly, there's lots of stuff I would have gone into there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Hayley, would you like to respond to that, please?
What, Chairman, is that we have... Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Wherever we've discharged somebody, we have still spoken to family members. We've still done that engagement. But it is fair to say that we've not been giving people as much choice in terms of the care home that they go into, simply because in some cases we've not had that choice. If a home has had COVID positive, we've not placed anybody else in that home. So choice has been restricted a bit. In terms of the numbers of homes affected and the number of cases, we can get that. Gerald's team has got that information, so we're happy to share it. In terms of the Nightingale, my understanding is, and it's a CG decision, is that that's being stood down.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Harley, do you want to respond at all to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Willis.
Thank you, Chairman. So, sorry. Thank you, Hayley. Again, as everyone will say, of all of us councillors, we are eternally grateful for our officers' expertise and what our staff have done. I know it's been a tremendous effort, and I think North Somerset should be held up as a beacon for what our officers have done. So thank you. My bit is from the shielding bit. So Hayley has obviously brought up about shielding, and as I am and are a shielding family with husband, I have huge concerns. I locked us up 16th of March before we were told to, and went out 2 weeks ago for the first time. And I'm a pretty capable woman and quite a strong character, as some of you might know, and not slow in coming forward. But I can tell you, first time I went out, I sat in the car, I got to the shop, and I came back home because my knees were knocking, and it's scary. So, you know, we've got people who are shielding, who are isolated and on their own, locked up, and perhaps we could use or look at using with, all of the sources we have with Healthwatch, etc. Some of our volunteers that would still be able, that have been supporting these people, delivering food and medication packages and chatting on the phone. Perhaps we could use those people to help somebody get out. I mean, once I'm out, I'll willingly help somebody get out. But actually, it is almost an agoraphobic thing, because I've experienced it myself. I'm locked up. I haven't been out, apart from the garden with husband, and suddenly you've got to go in the big wide world. And it is terrifying, absolutely terrifying. That's before you even get in a shop and see somebody coming towards you with a mask on and a pair of gloves and thinking, oh my goodness, what have I got to do? So I think that fear about getting out for the shielding group is going to be bigger than we can even see, having been there myself. And I think perhaps we could use that voluntary sector, if we can do a bit of work on it, to help with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Hayley, what's your thought? That was very compelling, by the way.
Yes, I know Gerald might want to come in here, because Gerald was on a workshop the other day talking about the future of the voluntary sector. Gerald, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I suppose actually picking up Councillor Harley's questions, I mean, there are some stats about the questions she asked in the next presentation. But secondly, in terms of, yes, there was a stakeholder group of officers across the council that looked to consider how North Somerset together and the variety of voluntary sector responses can be supported. Certainly for adult social care and commissioning, there are obvious opportunities, and we would see the well-being service as a key knitwear link between those services, as we'll come on to. So I do think there is opportunities to do that. We're also making links, as Hayley's referenced, in terms of how she's referenced the daycare response, linking that with our wellbeing service and linking to how we support people that are fragile from shielding and from social isolation, and how we can prevent hospital admissions and prevent deterioration in those circumstances. So it is a thing, it certainly is an area that we are looking to realign resources as much as possible to support in those contexts.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Hayley? No? Are you there,
Yeah,
Hayley?
I support everything Gerald has just said.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Solomon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we could hear you, Hayley. Thank you very much, Chair. I've been had personal experience over the last 2 to 3 months with both Hayley and Gerald's department. And first off, I'm going to say what everybody else is saying. I cannot fault in any way the way they've handled the problems that I've encountered over my brother during what has been an incredibly difficult period. And I've seen those problems. They're problems of communications to the hospital, to move between hospitals, then from the hospitals to the care homes, and the communications between hospitals and care homes. Not enough care homes because of the COVID situation. They can't move people easily, so they're moving them out of county, and bad experiences out of county, back into county, good experiences. Communicating with the actual patients themselves has been difficult. Wi-Fi issues. So when Hayley's department or Gerald's department or the housing have tried to get in touch, they can't get in touch with the patients because of communication problems. It's an extremely difficult time. And now there's a shortage of beds, a shortage of flats for people coming out of care that want to come out of care and get back. That wasn't me. There seems to be a real shortage of homes. and the availability of homes. So it's meaning that people are staying in care at very high cost because we don't have flats available for them to move into. It's a very difficult time for our team, and they're handling it very well. The pressure must be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Who's next, Leo?
The next speaker is Councillor Connolly.
Councillor Connolly.
Hi there. I'm subbing for Councillor Parker, but actually my question's been answered in response to another one, so I'll pull out. So you don't need me.
Thank you very much. Who's next, Leo?
Councillor James.
Councillor James, Hugh.
Hello, brilliant. So, like everyone else, I'd like to thank officers and the staff and our partners, but I think I'll just focus on one group that I've engaged with in my role in Lights Homes, which is the hospital discharge team. They're so passionate to their work. They've had conversations with me trying to explain in detail what they do, and it's just so clear that they really enjoy what they do and make so much effort to improve the lives of patients in the hospital. So I just thought I'd say that. But on the voluntary work you were talking about, Gerald, so North Somerset started conversations about North Somerset Together and conversations with vans. Is there any sort of clear shape forming about what that structure will be, or is it a bit too early to decide what the structure of how North Somerset Together and Voluntary Action North Somerset will interact with adult social care in the future post-COVID?
Thank you, Hugh.
I think it is a little early. I think we have areas that we would want to explore with the voluntary sector and vans in particular. However, we also recognise that this was a community response, and it's not necessarily for the council to dictate what those groups see their future as. So I think that needs to be a process of dialogue around what the art of the possible is and how we can mutually benefit from the fantastic response that those community groups have made.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, Leo, any further questions?
No further questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much, everyone. Let's progress on to Gerald's presentation. Thank you, Gerald.
Okay, so I'm going to try and buy us a bit more time, because obviously there's an overlap, as we've constantly referenced already, between hospital discharge, the operational response, and the commissioning services. But I know there are areas that members would want an update. So this is an update of what we presented at HOSP, and obviously does reflect updated numbers. So I think, again, as Hayley's referenced, we anticipated at the start of the COVID crisis a huge tsunami of demand that was going to overwhelm our hospitals and adult social care. That modelling has reduced dramatically in terms of something like 80% reduction in demand in terms of the latest modelling, but obviously we're aware of the potential of a second surge. So in that context, we have brought on new capacity. We were fortunate enough to identify 50 additional beds in the residential nursing sector. That new capacity is quite challenged at the moment. It is a challenge. Some of the biggest numbers there, St George's, they have had difficult experiences in COVID and are currently closed for new admissions. So as the hospitals now move into recovery mode and look at other activity, and as Hayley's alluded to, winter pressures, we're not out of the pressure zone at all, and it is difficult in terms of residential nursing placements at this precise moment. Hayley's referenced the wellness service, so I won't go on into too much detail, but you do have details of what that service has offered. It's offered support to well over 120 people. We have as you know, been pushing technology, and that's very much at the heart of that service. And as Hayley said, this has been a well-received service. It's, it is a linkage service, so very much as we've just referenced North Somerset Together. There has been the opportunity to refer in from those voluntary responses where they felt that there was a need for more supervision and professional support. And that's happened, but equally it is, as I think Hayley alluded to, a critical hospital admission prevention in terms of allowing, as Sorona support is reduced, as that support's reduced, allow the person to avoid hospital admission. Throughout our services, as gives you some examples of the additional technology that we've put in place as part of that community response. And I should say, as I did reference, we are, as part of the COVID response, keen to develop our tech offer. We're waiting for the outcome of a very substantial capital bid through the NHS resources for acoustic monitoring, which I know members have viewed at Sycamore House, and I think is a fantastic opportunity to support our care homes, but equally to provide a cost-effective community response as well. I think Hayley's covered in terms of the work of the ICC, but there you can clear cross operations and commissioning, the 7-day response that we have provided. And you've got that again in terms of so ICC support and brokerage and social work support on a 7-day basis. That's been throughout the period from the very beginning of this crisis. I think we've referenced the fact that we do face a challenge around recruitment for social care. Domiciliary care, we've had a number of initiatives. We had the Proud to Care initiative that you're aware of that reduced attrition on domiciliary care by 50% last year. We're now looking at how we would develop agency support and accessing potentially either NHS hospital bank staff or a neutral vendor agency support to reduce costs of agency staff. We need to do this in the context of the infection control situation, and clearly what that will need to involve is that agency staff are only used in one location and are not moved around with the inherent risk of infection associated in that. So that gives us an added impetus, not only the financial support to the care homes and domiciliary care, but actually to ensure that oversight is available to ensure that infection control is at the heart of how that is delivered. I've added since HOSP, which was the omission about the enormous resource we put into supporting the sector with PPE. So you do have details around just how much PPE we bought. We've spent alone £500,000 on PPE, but in addition to that, we've distributed that, and we've set up some, quite effective urgent response services to supply PPE to the sector. And you can see just the levels of PPE that have been distributed and provided to our sector. And I'm pleased to see that in the capacity tracker, which is part of the infection control process, the capacity tracker is used to monitor PPE and staffing and voids in the care home sector. I'm pleased to see that the questions from the sector, we had a 99 out of 100 response to the capacity tracker usage, but 94% of our homes recognised that they did have PPE support. And we are picking up with the other 6% that felt there was some sort of gap. As I referenced,
infection support plan, we've provided and had that validated that with the Department of Health and Social Care that our action plan is fit for purpose. That obviously has been worked through with partners such as Sirona and the CCG and public health colleagues to support in full how the sector recovers from the impact of COVID and how it ensures that further waves are avoided as much as possible. I think Catherine will reference in more detail around this, but one of the requirements around the infection control grant was for us to publish what support we were offered, both financial and in kind. And there you have an outline of the support we have made. So for the care homes, crucially, for the period of this crisis, we have supported them with an additional £100 per placement. Additionally, we have distributed to the care home sector per bed basis 75% of the 3.8 million infection control grant. So there has been significant resources provided to the sector, but I think we need to recognise that still is a challenging environment for them. We're in dialogue with at least 2 homes around their financial difficulties at the moment, and obviously with the council's financial position and uncertainty around what future government funding is going to be in place, this is a very ongoing challenge. We are seeking approval for the funding to continue into the end of July, but there is uncertainty around how much we can continue to support the sector at the levels here. For domiciliary care, we have provided an additional £1 per hour and have allocated most of the 25% discretionary element to the domiciliary care sector. I think it's fair to say that particularly around the agreement to pay on a historical value, that the domiciliary care sector is coping better than the care home sector at the moment, and we'll go into that in terms of some of the stats you'll see later. One of Councillor Harley's questions was around deaths in care homes. There is a COVID stat, but as you can appreciate, the accuracy of whether death is by COVID or not is a moot point, and I think this is a more robust comparison. And as you can see from this, the North Somerset figures are actually probably slightly lower than our neighbours, but they did peak in the April period where they were operating at roughly twice the normal average of deaths in care homes. As you can imagine, Hayley was talking about hospital discharges. We've seen a big drop in admissions from care homes, as you can imagine, given the infection control. And so where does that leave the care home sector at the moment? In terms of occupancy, you can see that we're similar to our neighbours at 84% from the capacity tracker. You can appreciate that financial viability for the care home sector is probably in the region of 92 to 95%. So they are significantly below the levels of occupancy. And that will not be just local authority placements, that'll be self-funders as well. So there is a challenge for particularly the 6 services that have dropped below 70% occupancy.
Gerald, could I just ask a question? I'm not sure where we are in the slides. Did you want me to move on because I'm?
Sorry, I've tended to. Sorry, that's my fault. I'm looking at the slides myself, so I've done that myself. You haven't moved on. No, you haven't. I've moved on quite rapidly, to be honest. So, do you want to go to the? I don't see whether it's numbered. Slide 13.
You will have. They're not numbered on the full screen, so you will just have to stop me when I get there. Keep going.
I think you can stop now. Stop now.
Okay.
Go back, but go back one. So just to recap then on the stats, because I think that's what's particularly important that you have on screen. So there you have in green the North Somerset deaths in care homes, and as you can see, the blip is in April, where roughly speaking we saw twice the number of deaths in care homes than the previous period. So if you move on. As I referenced, non-elective admissions you've seen have dropped inevitably with the reduced activity in the hospitals and the reluctance for residents of care homes to move to the hospital for that type of option. Move on. Here you have what I referenced, sorry, without your slides, the 84% for North Somerset occupancy, and as I said, realistically, a viable market would need 92 to 95% occupancy would be a healthy market. So clearly, we have seen a drop in occupancy. Move on. There you can see how over the period of time, the track around outbreaks. Initially, North Somerset was well below the curve, but did spike up in April in particular, but has fortunately started to drop now. So moving on. So in terms of what the total impact of COVID has had, there you have the number of North Somerset funded placements. So you can see that we've had a drop of 10% over the period of time since the end of March. That's very significant numbers for that sector. If you move on. And there you've got plotted the equivalent figures for domiciliary care. Now, actually, the reduction in delivery at one point was more extreme in domiciliary care, but we need to recognise that what we've actually seen is, and we have protected the providers in terms of paying on historical levels of activity, is that domiciliary care, we've actually seen an improvement in recruitment in domiciliary care. What we've seen is a big drop in demand as obviously people either in quarantine or perhaps not necessarily, shielding, or not necessarily wishing to receive a service at the moment, have suspended or not taken on their packages of care. So we have actually seen a drop in overall activity in domiciliary care, but actually in terms of staff recruitment and unmet need, both have seen an improvement. So the situation has been far more difficult for residential and nursing care than domiciliary care generally, although there are one or two exceptions within the domiciliary care market that have not necessarily seen quite as much pickup in staff. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gerald. Once again, extraordinary insight. It's very helpful. Thank you so much. We will begin again with the telephones. Councillor Hartley.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mine's going to be very brief. You'll be pleased to hear. It's really information I want, please. Regarding PPE, I want to know if we can see the NHS procurement policy and with the care homes, the PPE, because I noticed from Gerald's presentation that he said we put in so many thousands into it. Well, I want to know, prior to this COVID virus, what was in for to protect these homes, and indeed from the NHS. I want to see in depth that, because I think there's some concerns. The other thing, Chairman, I think we all recognise it's going to be very difficult. I also realise that we're going to have to make a good case to the government for looking at where the funding is going to come from. And in response to that, I would like to actually include that we look at the self-funders, because I've got some grave concerns that if we aren't careful, these self-funders are not going to be around. And when I look at what the cost is that the self-funders are contributing, it actually makes you blink. And very strongly blink. So we need all of that information, in my opinion, to come out, that we find out how many self-funders we've got in detail, what they're contributing against those that are those that are actually the authority is paying for, because let's be fair, they all get the same treatment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Gerald?
Yeah, so yes, we clearly, guidance with regards to PPE has changed. It has travelled a long distance in this period, and I'm sure that will be subject to national scrutiny around how appropriate some of that guidance was at different phases of this process. So I don't think that's something we can comment on. I think that we and Hayley's referenced hospital discharge arrangements. We have very much been the advocate of the care home sector with regards to ensuring that homes would receive appropriate PPE to accept hospital discharge arrangements. Now, clearly, there is a huge clinical challenge around the delay in terms of testing outcomes with the point of discharge, and inevitably there will be circumstances where, and we've referenced it in terms of the block contracts, where hospital discharges may have resulted in or contributed to outbreaks. However, that is different to, was there scenarios where homes were expected to support discharges without PPE? We very much supported the homes. If that happened, it's only happened in the context of misresults or miscommunication around the status of PPE at that point. So yes, there are other areas of the country that have taken different lines. We'll obviously need to look at that in more detail, but I think that our brokerage service was very much an advocate for the care homes. Our care homes are quite strong at advocating for themselves, and were very keen to ensure that testing was in place. Clearly, there were delays in testing. There were delays in access to PPE at times, but certainly in this area, I think the sector was well supported.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Howley?
No, not really, Chairman. I think that I actually I'm not totally happy with. I know Gerald has said he can't get the information, but I do think we need that information, because we're going to make recommendations either to government or somewhere, and we need to have all that information so you've got it evidence-based.
Gerald, do you want to respond to that? Because I can't help thinking myself that information must be out there somewhere.
I'm not sure that I did say that we wouldn't be able to provide more information. I think it's a complex picture, because the guidance is changed at different points. So it is about understanding the chronology of policy and guidance and where we were at individual points. But yes, we can provide more information around, and I know that there are freedom of information requests around the area of PPE and hospital discharges, which our hospitals are dealing with at the moment.
I think it would be really helpful if we could facilitate that information without the necessity for Information Act and so forth. But thank you. Councillor Willis.
Yes, very briefly, Chairman, thank you. So, Gerald, it is on, as Councillor Harley said, the self-funders in the care homes, having just lost my mum-in-law 2 weeks before the lockdown, and she was a self-funder. I am very aware of, the issues within the care homes, of the amount of self-funders the amount that we pay for as council. And, for the homes to lose, those self-funding monies is a very big hit. I am aware of that, and I'm aware of, the other issues that can come with it. So perhaps, Chairman, we need to do something on a small working piece on those issues with Gerald. Perhaps we could have some information come through. I know Councillor Chair is always very keen on working on her care home issues, so maybe we could gather some information that way, Chairman, and get some information through to see if we can get into the figures and see where we are and see, there are going to be care homes at risk, we know. So, thank you.
I thank you very much. I think it's been, and it is indeed very clear from some of the commentary in the press and media and so forth at the moment, is that very real concerns about self-funders, and not least in terms of the impact that a recession will have on the investment market. Sorry, Gerald, please.
Yeah, no, we would be happy to provide as much information as required. We're obviously now have the benefit of the capacity tracker that gives us pretty live positions with regards to placement activity and voids. Yes, as I said, 84% is not the number that we would want overall, and obviously homes that have had COVID outbreaks will be lower than that. So it is a challenging market. We are committed to refreshing our market position statement so that we can take account of the impact of COVID and try at this stage probably second guess where these markets will go over the next 6 to 12 months. Clearly there has been, or there is currently a cultural change, a bit of aversion to placements in care homes, a bit of aversion currently to placements in domiciliary care. But clearly, as the economy changes, it's inevitable that these placements will start to pick up, and we need to ensure that we have sufficient provision for the post-COVID era.
Yes, thank you very much, Joe. Thank you. Leo,
Thank you.
Who's indicated they wish to speak?
We have requests to speak from Councillor James and Councillor Cherry.
Councillor James, the floor is yours.
So just a number of things to pick up. I was wondering about the technologicalization stuff you're doing at the moment. What has the feedback been from other care providers into adopt, as in, will we be able to scale up, do you think, if we do get the funding? Have they welcomed the idea of technologicalization, or have they been a bit hesitant? The other question is, what happened in St George's to make, as in, has it just had a large number of deaths, or is it, is there some reason why the bed occupancy is so low there? I noticed there's never place, but there's only 2 beds there, so the stat doesn't seem as significant. And the final thing is just to support Councillor Harley and Councillor Willis on their point on self-funders in the private care sector. Councillor Bell and myself have been in contact with Dr. Fox over the recent months about just the really unacceptable increase in care costs especially for people who are on their pensions. So an increase in costs can really affect their lives. So I really welcome that working piece, especially if we can get it in time for the social care funding call for evidence from the select committee, so we can get our MPs and different parliamentary groups to actually look into the way that increases in costs impact families, especially on care. But yes, those 2 points were the main ones I wanted to raise, the first 2.
Thank you, Hugh.
Yeah.
Gerald?
Yeah, picking up those, the council will know that we had a workshop of engagement with the providers around acoustic monitoring. I think you popped in for a little bit of it. So I think there was a lot of interest. Obviously, we've had to suspend the implementation mainly because during the COVID period, cabling homes was probably not something the homes were particularly keen on, but we are about to resume that, and really the issue is the scale, whether we will be able to double the scale if we are successful with our NHS funding, which would make the difference of making the centralised monitoring service much more financially viable on day one. So I think there is a lot of interest. I think the homes are very interested, and I think what I should say is the NHS is interested, irrespective of whether it puts its hand in the pocket in terms of the grant. It is central to a cross BNSG pilot around working with our extra care providers to support acoustic monitoring and taking advantage in that area. So I think that is an area that we will want to take forward rapidly as soon as it is safe to do so. With regards to St George's has had 2 outbreaks over the period of time. Yes, it has been one of our most impacted homes. There have been a lot of staff that were tested positive, a lot of residents that tested positive, and a few deaths. And it is a big home, and it did have, it was our primary discharge for P3 beds. So, we will obviously want to ensure that home, when it reopens, which subject to no further outbreaks, will be next week for new admissions. We hope that service will be back fully up and running and reducing its void beds. Clearly, they're in a better position because they will continue to be paid for the NHS block beds, as opposed to homes that perhaps are spot purchased and who will have to take the brunt of that financial deficit.
That's really useful to hear, and I'm sure the rest of my colleagues would want to give their, condolences in respect to the staff and the residents there. And it's really interesting work on technology. That's a hard word to say, isn't it? Tech.
Yeah, you're right. Right. Councillor Cherry.
Hello. Sorry. Hello. Just to say, I've been talking to a lot of care homes in the area, and basically they did at one point, because they were so anxious about infections within their home, they resisted having any discharges, and consequently they suffered a bit in terms of occupancy. And I think we do have to look at how we can help this sector work, survive COVID, and at the same time keep going, because they knew that if they imported people that they could potentially infect a large number, which was why they were so concerned. So that was one concern, but the other thing is it's to do with the workforce. I hear what you say about domiciliary, and I'm really impressed by that. But what I'm also hearing is that younger people are now, with the lockdown being eased, they're looking at moving on from domiciliary care and doing other jobs. And because the wages are not particularly high, I think we're going to have another problem with recruitment fairly shortly. And the other thing is that also people are volunteering to look after their relatives rather than allowing domiciliary carers to go in to avoid risk of infection. So what can we do to help our voluntary organisations, which are also suffering because many of those volunteers are going back to work? How can we really help them to assist us with social care?
Good question. Good question. Gerald?
Yes, so picking up the last one, we referenced the workshop. One of the discussions that I've had with Richard Blows, who's obviously been liaison very closely with the voluntary action groups, is how we potentially segment some work that might be currently delivered through domiciliary care services that could be delivered through the voluntary sector. But clearly, there's also the segue the other way, in a sense of, there's been this huge, fantastic voluntary response. Is there, and, people are now going to face some challenging financial difficulties. Is there an opportunity for domiciliary care providers to benefit from, people that may want to continue to do that fantastic support, but perhaps take it that little bit further down the line, learn new skills and support our care industry? So I think that relationship both ways is going to be really critical as part of the future delivery. What we need to do is make, as the strapline goes, we're proud to care, is actually that fantastic response from the voluntary sector and from individuals. Let's see that transform into recognising that it is really something fantastic and it is proud to care. And if we can ensure that the remuneration is sufficient, then we should see the current bounce in domiciliary care continue. One of the things I would say is just, and this is a recognition to that sector, the domiciliary care staff. I was talking to one of our strategic providers in the last couple of days. They have never had, throughout the crisis, they have never had as low sickness levels or turnover as they have experienced, which I think does show is a testament to the commitment of those staff during this, quite horrible experiences for them on all sorts of levels. And yet they are, most of the providers are experiencing record lows, despite the fact that they're going into quarantine or whatever at different points in time. Sickness absence has gone down dramatically, and that couldn't be a better testament to their commitment.
Thank you very much, Gerald. I think one of the things perhaps as a nation that we may benefit from this is the national valuing or revaluing of carers. I really hope that makes a fundamental difference to our nature as a society. Is there anyone else wishing to pose any questions for Gerald?
There are no other speakers listed. If I could just mention as well, Chairman, I'm not sure whether you're monitoring chat, but Councillor Connolly has had to leave the meeting, and Sheila, the director, Sheila Smith, has also indicated she's had to leave.
Yes, I saw. Thank you very much, Leo. Can we now move on to Mark Hughes? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, wanted to provide you with a brief update on the work that we've been undertaking in our homeless service in the light of COVID-19. A lot of what I'm going to say today will focus on rough sleepers, and clearly they are the most visible part of homelessness, because you can see a rough sleeper on the street. Most homeless people you can't see. But it's also clearly a very vulnerable group during COVID-19. If you're on the street, clearly you don't have anywhere that you can go, either to follow the government guidance on staying at home, or if you need to self-isolate. And we also know that the health risks that rough sleepers might face are likely to be greater simply because of their vulnerability. However, it's just worth me mentioning that rough sleepers do represent a very small number of the total number of homeless people we see each year. So looking at COVID-19, perhaps first just to look back to what the position was prior to the 19th of March. At that time, we had 10 homeless people accommodated in the night assessment centre, so it was provided within the Somewhere to Go building. And Somewhere to Go itself was open 5 days a week, providing support, access to food and other facilities within the building. Subsequently, on the 19th of March, the night assessment centre closed at very short notice, and Somewhere to Go, providing the day services, closed about a week later. At a similar time, we had a request from government to accommodate those sleeping rough during the crisis, to avoid the need for anybody to sleep rough, and ensure that there was access to basic facilities which are needed to reduce health risks, so washing facilities, for example, and also that ability to stay at home, to self-isolate, all of the things perhaps we might take as for granted when we have accommodation. And we identified the main need in terms of accommodation was going to be for single people and rough sleepers, simply because of the challenges that rough sleepers face, and single people often facing the risk of rough sleeping. Thanks, Leah. If we could move on one. So, what did we do in response? We did a lot of work with providers to try and secure additional emergency accommodation. For example, bed and breakfast owners, hotel owners came together, and a small number agreed to provide us with emergency accommodation to house our rough sleepers in. We were able to house all of the residents from the night assessment centre in that emergency accommodation. And the outreach team, and I'll use this a few times as we go through the presentation, outreach are a team of staff employed by the YMCA that we fund through government funding through the Rough Sleepers Initiative, and their job is to make contact with rough sleepers on the street, to identify what their needs are, to help them secure accommodation and help them to move on. And they have a key role in making referrals through to services. So outreach continued to operate and still do throughout the COVID-19 crisis, identifying and supporting anyone at risk or actually rough sleeping. And in that period, anyone at rough sleeping was housed in emergency accommodation, regardless of their eligibility. And just to remind members, our legal responsibility is only to house those people who are in what we would call priority need. In other words, have a high level of vulnerability, and not all rough sleepers will fall into that category normally. But we housed everybody during that period who was at risk of rough sleeping or were rough sleeping, regardless of that eligibility. So if we could go on one, Leo, thank you. So looking then at some outcomes, I just preface this by saying that the figures here are continually changing on a day-to-day basis, and analysis is difficult in a sense of trying to be precise, because some individuals may present to us on a number of occasions and in different months, and they may also present to more than one agency, and therefore will get overlap in some of the numbers. But in summary, and I'll just give you the update as at today, we have housed 97 people during the COVID-19 crisis, 37 of which remain in emergency accommodation as at today. And when I'm referencing those numbers, that relates to rough sleepers who we would not otherwise largely have had a duty to. We accommodate other people as well. So in relation to outreach, we have some figures there showing for March, April and May. I think that was partway through May when we produced the papers. And you can see some details there of the number of people that have been housed through outreach, through the night assessment centre, etc. And just to emphasise, there is some overlap in those numbers. So I think the key point I would make really is that in relation to outreach, everyone identified by outreach was offered accommodation, and only a small number of people who were offered accommodation chose not to take it up or weren't able to take it up. I think the second point I would make is that a high proportion of the people presenting to us were new to the service, and either being at risk of homelessness or at risk of rough sleeping or actually at risk of homelessness. A much smaller number were either rough sleeping just prior to the lockdown or actually started rough sleeping during the period. So largely, having housed people who were rough sleeping and those who might have started rough sleeping during the crisis, the majority of our response has then been focused on those people who were at risk of rough sleeping. Okay, if we could move on, Leo. So just to discuss some of the issues that we faced. We faced a limited supply of accommodation, and we were reliant on a very small number of accommodation providers. We did encounter some issues, I have to say, where individuals are, I think, placed together in difficult circumstances, such as this. There is a risk, really, that people's anxiety increases. That can result in more risk-taking behaviour. It can result in a lack of engagement. It can result in people's behaviour changing and resulting in some cases a need to evict people or to move them on. So we faced a number of issues in practice as a result of that. We also faced issues with a number of services closing. So, for example, if you're a rough sleeper and there's no public toilets, what do you do? If the place that you normally get food from, for example, Somewhere to Go, closes and the majority of shops are shut, what do you do? And we also faced an issue that we predict there'll be an increase in family homelessness, particularly as the courts reopen. So there have been no evictions through the courts to date through the crisis, and that there can be no evictions until the end of August at the moment. So I've referenced the work we undertook on accommodation sourcing. In relation to the other actions, we work very closely with other agencies to deal with a number of the issues that we've referenced. So, for example, in terms of tackling the antisocial behaviour, we work with the police and voluntary sector partners and the Council's Antisocial Behaviour Service, providing support for owners, looking for opportunities to engage with the rough sleepers to try and change any difficult behaviours, to support owners where they needed to take eviction action, but also multi-agency work around service provision. So, example, if we look at the different groups there, Somewhere to Go continued to provide access to, or did provide, continue to provide access to food. The YMCA also opened up some of their facilities to enable sleepers to take a shower and use toilets. From the council's point of view, we're looking ahead at the demand we might face, and we will are in the process of recruiting additional permanent and temporary staff. And all of this inevitably has brought some significant cost implications for us. I think at the moment our best estimate is the total cost will be around about £150,000 in terms of the net cost to the council after we deduct the income we'll get from benefit and other sources by accommodating people throughout this period who we wouldn't have previously accommodated. That is subject to how many people we continue to house over the next period, and also how much housing benefit we're entitled to claim for those people that have been placed. So the numbers will vary a bit, but I think that's a good estimate at the moment. Thank you, Leah. If we could move on. So in terms of next steps, we're offering homeless applications to every person. So that's everyone who we've housed has got an opportunity for them to be considered whether they're statutory homeless. If somebody is statutory homeless, the outcome at the end of all of that is there is an entitlement to permanent accommodation. We're developing personal housing plans for each person that's been housed, and ensuring that there is access to advice and assistance through our homeless service and through our partners for those rough sleepers. We're also looking at partnership work to access longer term accommodation, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. I think the one thing I would reflect on is that clearly COVID-19, as you know, colleagues have described today, has been hugely challenging for a whole range of services and hugely challenging for this particular client group. But it's also presented an opportunity, ironically, that we might not have otherwise have had, which is it's resulted in rough sleepers and people who are at risk of rough sleeping more of them moving into accommodation than would otherwise have happened, and providing us with that opportunity to engage with them about how they see their future, so where they want to live, what support needs they've got, how we can help them move on. And I think for all of the huge tragedy and difficulties that COVID-19 has brought, it has also provided this opportunity, and it's an opportunity that we're taking. We got contacted by MHCLG, that's Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, a few weeks ago, and that was every local authority was asked to put together a plan for how it would enable people who had been housed during the crisis in emergency accommodation to move on to more sustainable accommodation in the future and access the support they required. We provided analysis at that point of time of the housing support needs of the people that we had housed during the crisis. And at that time, about 50% of the people that we'd housed would have some higher support needs. And we also identified how we could try and house people through our work with registered social landlords, for example, accessing existing vacancies as they come up, potentially by them acquiring existing housing, because there's no time to build new. Somebody might be able to acquire and lease existing housing and make it available for rough sleepers. So, I mean, we do a lot of positive work with the private rented sector. That's really taken off in the last couple of years, and we're continuing to do that, and also looking at opportunities for referral into supported housing. We also made government aware of the support that we felt the council needed, funding to help fund the support and help secure the accommodation. So we provide, for example, deposits. We provide other incentives to landlords to house people. The potential for capital to be made available to enable housing associations to lease. And we also suggested some housing benefit changes around direct payments and potentially suspending the single room rent or increasing the value, which would help, I think, landlords recover a great amount of their costs through benefit and make it more viable. And we also suggested more innovative ways of accessing services, particularly addiction recovery services. There was a response received from government yesterday. Nationally, we've not received an individual one other than through our advisor. The announcement nationally was that there was £105 million being made available to support the rehousing of rough sleepers housed during the crisis. £20 million of that was repurposing, as it was called, existing funds. And that largely, as far as I'm aware, relates to monies that we'd set aside for rough sleeper programmes, but for one reason or another, because of the close down during the crisis, we will not have been able to spend that money, and therefore we can use it on providing accommodation instead. And then the detail really is awaited from government on exactly what the funding can be used for, how much we will get, how we access it. But the main emphasis I'm reading in the press releases is the focus will be on accessing accommodation, providing support. At the same time, government had previously already announced that they will be funding 3,300 new supported homes this financial year, and they've also announced that they'll bring forward £16 million for substance abuse, which had already been announced. So I think from the service point of view, we will continue to, I think, monitor and review the government guidance as it's come forward and look at how we'll be adapting our service as we move forward to what we described as the new normal. But certainly our priority over the next few months will be housing those people who we've accommodated in an emergency accommodation and responding to any peak in homeless presentations that we predict we will get over the few months after the courts open. I think that's all I'd like to say, Chairman, but leave it open to the panel for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Very helpful. Subject close to my heart. Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to ask a question. I just want to say well done to Mark and his team, because as we've seen before the lockdown, they were very efficient, and we were always very impressed with their presentation and what they're doing. So well done.
Thank you. Councillor Willis.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As in we see in this country of ours so very often, from crisis and emergency comes humanity. And, you know, by us being able to go through a crisis, you know, we've been able to do work that we've so wanted to do for so long.
and a positive out of a negative. So I am delighted for that, for those of us who've suffered so long, as we all have, seeing people out on the streets. One query is those rough sleepers that had their family, which were their dogs. Obviously, we can never home those people easily. Did we lose very many, that we couldn't house for that, please?
Mark?
So I'm not aware of the detail of individual cases, but you'll see from the statistics that we housed a very high proportion, for example, of people referred by outreach, and those were the people who were most likely to have dogs. I'm not aware that it has been a significant issue.
Oh, lovely.
And certainly everybody who wanted accommodation, we offered it to. So I think that's the key thing.
Yeah. Thank you. That is such good news to my heart. As we know that they're out there, and their animals are their life, they're their family, and that's why we know that they stay on the street. So well done to everybody, and let's hope we can continue it, as you say, with the funding coming in and innovative looking, that we can, not have this problem on our streets, that we can help it. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Leo, who's next to speak?
I've got Councillor Hugh James lined up to speak, and Councillor Cato following him.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Yeah, I'm sure, like everyone else, I'm singing my praises for this for housing, because they've done they responded so quickly to the housing needs presented by COVID. And thank you very much also to the hotel owners who opened up during this crisis. I was just wondering about arrears, whether you have any idea of the extent of, there's not much data, so the answer is probably no, but whether you have any idea of the extent of the arrears within North Somerset, both the spread and also are high-risk individuals just heading into debt right now, or are most people able to sustain their, basically, can we expect a huge amount of homeless people to present themselves once courts reopen? And also ASB, I've heard that ASB shot up during coronavirus. Has it shot up, and are there any sort of lessons you've learned through your response to this? Because it's pretty hard to respond to ASB right now, I'm guessing. Those were the two questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor James.
Antisocial behaviour, sorry, I shouldn't.
Yeah. So I can respond to one of your questions and not the other, but simply because it's not within my remit, but I'll come on to that. So in terms of arrears, it is very difficult for us to assess the state of people's arrears, simply because we're not a landlord and therefore can't see the rent accounts. So we wouldn't know from social housing because we don't really have any. And in terms of the private rented sector, again, that we don't have that visibility. What we do know is people are continuing to come forward to us who are in arrears, who will have faced difficulties during this crisis. And we are working with them to look at how they can actually manage those arrears. And the encouragement we always give to landlords is say, look for a repayment plan with your tenant. Look for something that's realistic for them and is realistic for you, so you don't have to evict them. Because the last thing we need is for landlords to evict people. So we really do need some toleration during this difficult period for people to put together an affordable repayment plan. There is advice available for our team. There's advice available from the DWP, from the Money and Pension Service as well, and also from the CAB. So there's a lot of advice available out there. And certainly talking to CAB the other day, whilst their physical offices have been closed, they found actually that they're continuing to get a very high level of take-up via email and phone, and there's a good level of satisfaction with that. And I think we're finding similar. So all of our work largely has been done remotely. All of our homeless assessments, something we always used to meet face-to-face with, and that we may reflect on that going forward about different ways of working, have been done remotely. So in terms of arrears, we don't know the precise answer. I think we can expect more people to be in arrears, and that's why we've gone out and recruiting, or in the process of recruiting, some additional staff to deal with that.
Oh, that's good.
It's not a precise number because we don't know exactly how significant an impact it's going to create. What I would say with the courts opening is, if there's a backlog, in other words, a lot of people in arrears, then so too there's likely to be a delay in them getting to court, because there'll be too many to go through court quickly, and that gives us that opportunity to work with those individuals and for them, to be honest, to take the advice, to be clear what their legal rights are and what steps their landlord must go through if they wish to evict them. Probably the bigger risk, and to be frank with you, and as it always is that often it isn't tenants losing their accommodation through a physical eviction, but because their security of tenure with short hold tenancies is relatively short, so 6 months or a year, landlords might more often just wait until that short hold tenancy expires and then just not renew the tenancy. And so that is a real risk, that it won't have to go through the court. It will simply be an assured short hold coming to an end, and the landlord saying, I'm not renewing. And there is sort of pressure nationally to reverse that, generally, just so that tenants have got far more security.
Brilliant, that's really useful to know.
In relation to thank you. In relation to antisocial behaviour, so I'm not in a position to be able to respond to that in detail, because I don't deal with antisocial behaviour generally, but certainly Howard Pothecary or Paul Morris would be able to give you that feedback. I'd suggest perhaps going to Paul Morris. I think what we did find in terms of housing rough sleepers was that the antisocial behaviour that perhaps the public thought was being caused, and it was sometimes seen in the town centre in Weston, by rough sleepers during this period, largely wasn't being caused by rough sleepers themselves. It was being caused by other people, perhaps who had some association with people who we were housing and were congregating together, and that took a life of its own in terms of people meeting regularly and the implications that has, particularly when everything else is locked down. I think perhaps what we learned, in a sense, is perhaps what we already knew, which is it's through partnership working that we're able to deal with this. It isn't just about taking enforcement action, it's also about the support we can give for those that are causing the antisocial behaviour, to try and get to the bottom of it and try and reduce the opportunities.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would have thought that the lack of funding of the court system works in our favour sometimes? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Councillor Cato.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate everybody's work on all this, as other people have said. And I'm also kind of still astounded that in a country like ours, that there are people who are rough sleeping and not able to be taken care of in better ways. So I'm really appreciative of how that seems to be transitioning. But then I think Ros Willis said something about it was difficult to find housing for rough sleepers with dogs, and I'm going like, we're meant to be a civilized society, and what's going on there? What's the story?
Okay, so perhaps 2 points really. I think why people end up rough sleeping is a complex picture, and it's probably unique to each individual as to what reasons led to them losing their accommodation and what might be preventing them from taking up a new tenancy. And so you would have seen, for example, from the graph, there were a number of people who didn't take up a tenancy with us. There are a number of people who moved on from accommodation. And those reasons are complex, other service responses are required to really respond to those, and we work with partners to do that. I think in terms of dogs, the issue is probably more related to urgent accommodation. So where somebody needs accommodation quickly, can a dog be accommodated within it? So if you went to a bed and breakfast with your dog, would that bed and breakfast owner be happy to take the dog? As I said, in this particular case, I'm not aware of any issues, and everybody who wanted accommodation, we've been able to house.
Brilliant.
In terms of permanent accommodation, it's like any landlord will take a view on whether pets are allowed, depending on the type of accommodation. Is it up several flights of stairs with no garden, where a pet might cause a difficulty, and what types of pets might cause a difficulty? Dogs, large, small, versus other types of pets. So, yeah, it is a complex picture.
Thank you. I'd love to talk with you further after the meeting as well sometime.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will.
Thank you.
A while ago, every time I have a conversation with Mark, my eyes get open further. Who else? Is there anyone else to speak, Leo?
No further speakers. Councillor Solomon has indicated he wishes to speak.
Thank you very much, Leo. How dare you miss me? Thanks, Leo. I want to come back on the homeless situation in the housing side, because again, I have an enormous amount of experience through personal situation where I had a niece on the street for over 20 years who unfortunately died recently. Again, it was all due to the time she spent on the streets and drinking and falling off a wall in Newquay. And she would be housed, and we would go along, and she'd be nice and comfortable, and we'd buy her furniture and we'd have her settled. She'd go back drinking and she was back on the streets. And it happens all the time. You're housing people, then they're falling back into some of their problems, and they're back on the streets. And in some ways, she almost used to enjoy it on the streets at the time. It was a sort of camaraderie she had with people. So it's a very complex situation as to the choice people have. Some people choose to be on the streets. Others would rather be housed, and it's a very, very difficult situation that Mark's in. I know with that, and the point on dogs is, again, if you look, I'm looking at flats from Brother at the moment. It's a lot of people are saying no pet, and it just happens. So that's my input. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Is there no one else to speak? Because I would like us to move on to Catherine's presentation, care budget monitor and so forth. Okay.
No further speakers, Chairman.
Thank you, Leo. If we can progress, please, so over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just trying to share the report on my screen if I can, unless Leo could do that for me.
Yes, I'll do it. If you can't manage it, I can pull it up. So
Leo can do anything.
I know. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Leo.
Do you want that a bit smaller so it can be seen, or it's just if I make it smaller, it can be difficult to read? So
it works perfectly. I think I've pressed the button to say I request control, which might allow me to scroll up and down, might it?
Yep. I've just given you control.
Thank you so much. I wasn't intending going through the report in a lot of detail, and particularly as you've heard a lot this morning, this afternoon about COVID, I might perhaps make some reference to that rather than focus on the main content of the report. But I mean, essentially, the report is the usual budget monitoring report that we bring to you at various points during the year. This happens to be the year-end position for the last financial year, 2019-20. It shows a relatively positive position, with us having an overall very small overspend on adult social care of 50,000, a small underspend on housing of 45,000, which means our net overall position is overall overspend of 5% of £5,000, sort of a very, very small proportion of our large budget. So I think, in overall terms, that suggests that we're in a relatively stable position. We have had budget growth historically, and also a combination of a programme of savings which are designed to kind of reduce costs, but also manage demand. I think the one thing that I would say, which is of concern, is that we had to use one-off resources of around about £2 million last year. So £2 million of our expenditure was funded from reserves or from grants. So we just need to make sure that we have fully understood that and make sure that that's not going to be a burden in future years. So some of that spend would have been a one-off nature, and also some of that spend has now been mainstreamed into the budget from growth. Would people mind muting? I'm getting some background noise.
Thank you, Catherine. I was about to say that.
Thank you so much. So that's a really overall picture. I think, given what we've spoken about this afternoon, I was going to zoom all the way down to the paragraph that I put in here about COVID, and perhaps expand upon that a little bit. So I'm getting there. There we go. So hopefully people can see paragraph 3.16. So there was a report went to the executive yesterday that gave a little more detail about some of the estimated financial impacts of COVID. And I think it's fair to say that it's very fluid and unknown in lots of areas. But what I wanted to highlight here, I guess, is where there have been some significant pressures that relate to the work of this panel. And a lot of this has been referred to by Hayley and Gerald earlier on. So particularly Gerald mentioned quite rightly the fact that we've been supporting our care providers with their additional costs and pressures in two ways. So for care homes, we've been supporting with an uplift, a temporary uplift of £100 a week per placement. And in domiciliary care, we've been providing them with £1 an hour for those placements. It's worth noting that costs around about £550,000 for every month that we do this. We've got approval to do this up until the end of June, and there's a decision pending to carry that on until the end of July. So I think from a financial perspective, what's really important to note is that I think we all think it's quite likely that this support to providers will need to carry on for longer than perhaps we had originally anticipated. So Hayley and Gerald will be aware of a piece of work that's been done by or commissioned by ADAS and the LGA, and some work done by Languison, which indicates that the costs for providers during the period April to September has been in the region of £6.6 billion nationally. And that same report indicates that those pressures to care indicates
is now exiting.
Excuse me. Indicates that those pressures are going to continue probably for the rest of this financial year and possibly into the next financial year as well. So you guys can probably do the math just as well as I could. If you take 12 months worth of £550,000 a month, that's an extremely large financial burden to the council, particularly when it's not yet clear how much more government support that we're going to get. So members will be aware that we have had two tranches of funding from government, both of £5.9 million. But in overall terms, the pressure for the council is considerably more than that. A big chunk of that is this support to care providers. There's also, as members will be aware, a significant pressure in relation to lost income in various places, the most obvious being car parking, but there are also some pressures on leisure providers, pressures in relation to our commercial investment and rental income, etc. So the amount of money that we've got from government clearly is not enough to support the full effects of the pressures that we're facing. So we're planning on bringing a report to an executive meeting in July to say what the council is doing to try and mitigate some of that, and whether we might expect some more funding to come from government. But clearly we are in a very difficult position, and in a position whereby, in the absence of any additional money from government, we are going to have to look at ways that we can mitigate some of these pressures and find additional savings. So just to mention the other few areas in that paragraph, Gerald referred to the fact that we have had to purchase PPE on behalf of our providers, and we've done that. We've talked at length, quite rightly, about the sustainability of the care home market, and that is a big risk for us for the future, I think, particularly as voids become increasingly a pressure on providers. We have, I think, got some potential for some losses in income in relation to client contributions to care packages. And I think what's of particular concern also is there's probably a suppression of demand, isn't there, at the moment? And so what happens when things return to any kind of normal, and when lockdown eases, we're definitely going to see some pressures in relation to adult social care and across the board, children's social care, etc. So all that's trying to do really, I think, is just give you a sense of where the pressures are in adult social care, and also where those pressures are the rest of the council. As I said, there's going to be a report to an executive sometime in July to bring this information together so that all members can begin to understand what the pressures are, what mitigations we might need to put in place, and what more money we might expect from government. I think the word on the street is that we might get an announcement from government in July about the additional amount of money that they're going to give to us. Excuse me. We are making monthly returns to the MHCLG to let them know what our spending pressures are, what our losses of income are. And we have heard, I think, various commitments from government as to how much they're prepared to support local authorities to support their pressures. But equally, I think they have also said that we're going to have to contribute as well. So they certainly won't be giving us money that covers all of our pressures and all of our losses of income. So I'll pause there, and obviously I'm very happy to take questions.
Chairman, you appear to be muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Catherine. Questions are invited. Councillor Harley. Hello?
I do know that Councillor Willis has left. I'm not sure about.
Yes, I knew that Councillor Willis had. I wasn't sure about Councillor Harley. It would appear that she's left the meeting. Right.
No, Chair, she's muted.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can't see her here. No,
I should try and unmute her.
She's on the phone, isn't she?
I think someone has muted her phone.
Oh, right.
Councillor Harley, I'm just trying to find her now. She doesn't appear on my list.
Leo, that'll be the phone number at the bottom of the list of people.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing a number. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I shall Oh.
Councillor Anne Harley
is now exiting.
Right. Okay. Right. Who else? Who do we have first on the list, Leo?
Bear with me, Chairman. I'll just switch over to. It's Councillor James has indicated that he wishes to speak.
And I have Hugh on screen at the moment in front of me. Okay, please proceed.
Yeah, just that fun question of if government don't stamp up, what is? Are we likely to back down on the amount that we support our care providers, or do you think that we'll be able to prioritise this above ever? What will happen effectively if the government don't cough up? I mean, that's the $1 million question, I'm guessing. But
you're right, Councillor James. It absolutely is the $1 million question. Honestly, I think it's unlikely that the government won't provide another tranche of funding, but we don't know yet. So there are a range of things, of measures that we could take if we were left with the deficit. One of those things would be to look at our levels of reserves. One of those things that clearly will be to try and prioritise where we're making spending commitments. And the biggest one of those clearly is with care providers. I think we all know and believe that they are going to require support for the whole of the financial year. I guess there might be a question about the level of support required depending on particularly the extent of their additional costs and the level of void. So it kind of partly depends on what happens to demand for residential care home placements. So I've obviously seen quite a big reduction in demand over the last 2 months, but that might pick up. And I guess the other thing is thinking about savings plans. This is the time of year anyway where we would start to be thinking about our medium-term financial plan and what our savings plans might be for 2021-22. So we could think about bringing forward some of those savings plans. So it would always, I think, it will be a combination of things which will get us to the right place. Part of it will be, I'm sure, some more government funding. Part of it will be a reprioritisation. Some of it will be some savings. Some of it might be some contribution from reserves. But yeah, the $1 million question really is how much more money is government going to give us?
Brilliant, thank you very much. And to think a couple of months ago I was asking you whether there might be increases in funding soon.
I remember it. I remember it well, Councillor James.
Splendid. Anyone else?
No further questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Leo. Thank you. I know that we don't normally set a finishing time on these things, but in anticipation of the scale of the issues that we would be learning about and discussing, I'd kind of put 1:30 on my watch. So that seems to have worked. So far as I'm aware, there is no book called How to Manage a Nationwide Pandemic. But I think if one was commissioned, I believe that our officers and their teams would certainly be invited to contribute to it, because I think they have done a genuinely extraordinary job. I remember when the lockdown first began, my mother, who is 89, saying to me, "Oh, it's just like the war," simply because of the scale of the issues that we were having to address and encounter. Well done. Thank you so much, officers. Members, what I would like to do, it's clear from my perspective that there are a number of issues that have been highlighted that provide us the opportunity to compose and deliver some serious input and work. And I am very keen that we pursue those opportunities. So what I will do is come back to you in the near future with a briefing note on how that process might happen. And I need your input into that, because it's not my plan, it's our plan as to what we're going to be doing. And I would be grateful if we could look at starting work on that fairly promptly. So I would anticipate a meeting with officers, perhaps to refine what the key issues are that we would begin to work on, and the manner in which we are going to do that in the near future. And by that I mean within the next 10 to 14 days, if that's doable for officers, allowing for the fact that they have a much, much busier life than me. So if members are satisfied with that approach, that's what I will instigate, and I will be looking for assistance in order to do that. But before I close the meeting, members, are there any other points that you would like to make? Anyone? Right. If I may ask, when we close up, when we close, Vice Chair, can you and I have a chat before we finally sign off ourselves?
The Vice Chair is gone, I think, Chair.
Oh, right, okay. I'll get her another time. Right, so if everyone is satisfied with that, I will call the, oh, sorry, Leo, is there anything else that we need to address?
No, nothing that I can think of at this moment.
Thank you. Then thank you very much for your input, and this meeting is closed.